Good morning, and welcome into the Russ Joy Show. I'm Russ Joy. You knew that because you're smart, and it's also the name of the show. It has been quite a few days. Now, I want to apologize first and foremost because I broke a promise to all of you. Last week, I said, no matter what, there will be some kind of episode out on whatever day that was. That was Tuesday. Tuesday, I said, there will be a new episode of the show for Friday. Or there was going to be something. I was like, I'll record it the night before, and I'll make sure that it's out so that on Friday, you are not without an episode of this show. I didn't follow through. Things got a little bit chaotic. You wouldn't believe how hard it is, apparently, to get 4 little kids off to all the different places they need to go. And then we had to get ourselves finally ready to go out for a flight down to Houston, Texas. I'll tell you about that trip in a little bit, but there are some Phillies sports stories that are probably worth having a little chitty chat about as well. But I want to say good morning to all the people who are in the comments so far. Don't forget, if you're watching live, I prefer you to go over to the Russ Joy Show channel. Watch it there. Interact in the comments there. If you're watching on the Joy Media account, you might be talking to yourself or, into like a little bit of a void. So go to the Russ Joy Show YouTube channel, and that's where you can check in. Jake Grabby checks in, says, good morning, everyone. Peter says, morning. Joe Papel asks if the La Colombe is ready. I don't have La Colombe this morning. This also isn't Starbucks. It's a Starbucks refillable cup, but I made my own coffee this morning. I'm going to turn their logo away from here. They don't sponsor the show. Very sad. Very sad. And Nico says, what up? I want to welcome everybody into the show this morning. I'm actually rested, rejuvenated, re-energized. I'm going to get into the Phillies here in a little bit because they're so sad. I'd rather end on a sad note, but let me tell you about a couple of happy things. Let me tell you about a couple of good things that have happened in the last week. My wife and I celebrated our 10th anniversary on Friday. 10 years seems like an insane amount of time ago, and yet it's really not that long. And the more you talk to people and they're like, oh, it's our 5th anniversary, it's our 20th, you start to get a better feel, I think, for like what it actually is to be married that long. 10 years doesn't feel that crazy, but I think it's just because of where we are in our lives, because in 10 years, we've gone from married. I think we've moved 3 times, bought a house, gone through the house buying process twice. This is all going to be good for whoever decides to steal my identity next. Gone through a few different cars, right? 4 kids, multiple schools with the kids. Gone through the process of being a teacher to leaving teaching. In the meantime, doing the freelance writing thing and starting Snow the Goalie and doing that kind of stuff and doing Crossing Broadcast initially with Kyle and with Lefko. And it's just like everything is just kind of this wild ride. Doing the radio on 610 for a while, like all that kind of stuff. It's been quite the ride. And that's all happened in that 10 years of marriage. So we had this idea that, you know what, we're going to pick a city. My wife and I almost always, it's not like scary how often we're kind of in the same mind space, right? Like in the same headspace, same mindset. But like usually we are pretty well aligned with what we want to do. But getting into our anniversary, we were not aligned at all. My thought was, hey, we'll send the kids to grandparents. We'll send the kids maybe to my sister or like wherever. We'll split them up. And we'll go down and we'll go do an all-inclusive like we did for our anniversary. And in fairness, like when I was a kid, we didn't do the Jersey Shore trip. My mom would save up all year and we would go for a few days on a last-minute deal to the Caribbean, which sounds really snooty and pretentious, but I promise you it certainly was not that. It was just, it's cost-effective to do that. It's more cost-effective often to go down to the Dominican than it is to try to rent a beach house or whatever for a week, especially for just 2 people. I digress. So I thought, hey, you don't have to worry about your food. You don't have to worry about your drinks. You don't have to drive anywhere. You don't have to do anything. You just go sit by a pool, sip some margaritas, some daiquiris, maybe stick your feet in the water for a little bit. My wife's not a huge ocean fan. I don't like to go out too far. I'm convinced a shark is going to eat me. Doesn't matter if you had the entire area contained, like on Oak Island where they go to like dig out areas and they put up like the metal wall. Like that doesn't matter. I'll be convinced I'm going to get eaten by a shark. So I don't like to go in very far anyway. But my wife didn't want to do that. She sent me this idea of like, what if we go to the Finger Lakes, which to me, I still don't know what the Finger Lakes are. Like I've seen stuff. I've seen some of like the things that there are to do up there since. And I was like, oh, okay, that like kind of makes sense, but I don't like lakes. Not a big lake guy. She sent me a thing about like a tiny home. I'm like, that seems claustrophobic. No, so we didn't agree, and it was really weird, and we looked at each other, and I was almost like, wow, we're not going to do anything, are we? And then at one point we said, hey, what if we just do the thing that we typically do when we're, trying to find a new city? Like, let's kind of take this thing back to the original way that we used to do things, before all the kids, which was you pick a city that preferably is a good food city, and then you run with it. You book the hotel, book a flight if you need to, and just start hitting restaurants. And a few years ago, it was on Netflix on Ugly Delicious. Dave Chang, one of his shows, they talked about the city of Houston, and that Houston is a really good food city. So we started looking into it a little bit, and I found a restaurant. I'm like looking for Michelin star restaurants, 10th anniversary, why not? And in doing that, I found there's no Michelin guide in Texas. Apparently, it comes out later this year. So I start looking up, are there any chefs that have had Michelin stars? Are there any restaurants that are, Michelin star restaurants or could go that way? So we found this place called Le Jardinier, which at some point I'll put like pictures up, or maybe I'll put something on the channel. Because I actually do want to put together a thing about like why it's worth going to Houston. Like, spoiler alert, it is very worth going there, especially if you are somebody who is very much like a foodie, or even just somebody who's not a foodie or hates being identified as a foodie, but really just enjoys eating, right? Houston is a great, great place to go. It's a nice city. I still can't get over the fact that Texas roads are like 4 lanes wide each way, plus like a 5th lane as a dedicated U-turn, plus like they have this weird thing as lanes are diverging. I think it would have taken me 2 weeks to get used to driving in Houston. And we rented a car, which somehow got hit. It was parked. Somebody hit a parked car. We had to go through that. So we got to have like all the full fun experiences. But Houston was a really great city. That Le Jardinier place was insane. The food was incredible. I assume that it's going to get a Michelin star when it does. The already high price of their tasting menu and wine pairing and everything is going to jump even more. So I'm happy that we did that. We found a couple of really excellent barbecue places, including one on our way out of town. And I was really excited about it. Like, legitimately, I was very excited about like getting to stop and try to do something where we took some barbecue through security, which that was its own other thing, right? Like, security. I tweeted about this. TSA in Philly is what it is. If you've had to fly out of Philly, you know what I'm talking about. I shan't slander the good people of TSA, but what I will tell you is that it's not ideal. Okay, TSA in Philly isn't my favorite thing in the world. What I can tell you is that TSA in Houston is absolutely hilarious, because in Houston, we took our food through some of the barbecue that we had bought right before we left. And at that place, we bought like a giant spice rub, because a couple days before we left for vacation for our trip, I went on Facebook Marketplace and I found a big green egg. So I'm going to start smoking meats, which is going to be great. Very excited about it. So I'm like, let's get some spice rubs on the way back, because we enjoyed the barbecue at this place. So we get this big thing. So we're going through security, and they start, taking everything apart. Everybody's friendly. TSA people are friendly. Lady takes this big bottle of seasoning. She goes, "Oh, baby, what you gonna make with this?" I'm like, "We're gonna smoke a pork shoulder." She's like, "Oh, can I come with you?" I'm like, I don't know. I was like, "Hey, if you want to take the 3-hour flight, you got a place to stay. You come eat." And she's like, "Oh, you don't have to tell me to get a flight." I'm like, "Ooh. Okay, well, this is a nice interaction." The guy working next to her, looked at me like, "No, dude, seriously, like, she will fly. She'll fly to Philly. She'll find you, and she'll, like, crash at your house." He gave me that look. And I was like, all right, well, whatever. Now, I haven't heard from her yet. And if she somehow, like, searched me out, and she's watching the show, and she's in the comments, by all means, you still have an open invitation for that pork shoulder. But it was a really great trip. It was really refreshing. It was exactly what I think my wife and I needed, a few days away from the kids. I will say the last day, though, we went to the Fine Arts Museum. We went to Fine Arts on the second day. Third day was the Natural Science Museum. And when we got there, we started seeing all the families with the little kids. And, like, I'm pretty good about being able to, like, compartmentalize and not think about the kids when they're not around. And so, because if I do, then I get kind of sad. I miss our kids because I love them. And so on that last day, we're walking around the museum, and I'm seeing all these little kids, and I'm seeing kids that are our kids' age, and I'm like, all right, I think we're ready to go home. So it was a good 3-day weekend. It was really nice, but I do, like I said at the start, I apologize that we didn't have a Friday show. So apologies to you there. I'll make it up to you at some point, somehow, some way. I also got my first tattoo while down in Houston. You can't see it. It's on my finger there. But my wife and I decided probably about a year ago that we were going to get a ring tattoo because she's a music teacher. So sometimes, you have the ring hitting on the piano and everything else. It gets kind of annoying. And for me, I just don't like wearing a ring all that much. I'll wear a silicone ring. So I'm like, you know what? Pew! There we go. So I felt good about it. So that was fun. That was my fun thing. I'm going to go over to the comments really quick because it's Ford's birthday. He won't shut the fuck up about it being his birthday. Ford, happy birthday. Happy birthday. Longest rant about nothing ever. It's my fucking show, Ford. My show, not yours. All right. But much love to you, Ford, for being here. Just a reminder, as I said at the start of the show, if you're watching live, go over to the Russ Joy Show YouTube, not the Joy Media one, to watch it live. Okay? Okay. Now, we have two things that I wanted to get into today. One is a positive. One is about CJGJ, because I am so happy he's back. And I'm so happy that he's bringing back some accountability and some leadership to a defensive unit that absolutely needed it. But we kind of have to start with the absolute epic shit show that's your team, your town, your Philadelphia Phillies. And I'll admit, over the weekend, I didn't watch much of the Phillies at all, right? Because I was on this anniversary trip. But I'm monitoring it from a distance. And you know how, when you go on social media, you typically see stuff that makes you think, it can't possibly be that bad, right? Twitter's just toxic, but Twitter's the normal kind of toxic, right? I sat back and I thought to myself, there's no way that things could be going this badly for the Phillies, but they did. Phillies have lost 15 of the last 18 or 14 of the last 18. They've lost 7 straight series openers. They lost again last night to the Dodgers. Aaron Nola, once again had the opportunity to potentially go out and put on the whatever former ace hat, right? The one that we kept being told year after year, he's the ace, he's the ace, he's the ace. He had the chance to go out, kind of stop the bleeding, get things started in a positive way, gave up 4 runs, but he gave them up early. Gave them up in a disastrous 3rd inning. And so, no, that's not good. Aaron Nola, when given the opportunity a few times this season to kind of get things back on the right path for the Phillies, has failed to do so. And unfortunately, it's just become something that I think we've all grown far too accustomed to. And there's no reason to think that he's going to be able to pull the nose up on it. I have to tell you, I find Aaron Nola's epic collapse from being what was viewed as a guy who had Cy Young stuff to being whatever version of whatever he is now, to be one of the most disappointing developments as a Phillies fan in, I don't know, a decade. Or it was one thing, I always go back to 08 and 09 and 10 and 11, because when you think about the trajectory of that team, and you think about how that 08 team really overachieved, won the World Series, and then it felt like every year they added another piece to try to get just a little bit further, to make themselves a little bit more of a World Series threat. You add a Cliff Lee, you add a Roy Halladay, eventually you add a Roy Oswalt, you have the 4 aces and average Joe Blanton, who we love, wasn't average at all. You had all those guys, and it felt like every year you were just trying to add another piece. You added a Hunter Pence. You tried to do something to get yourself back to the World Series and put yourself in position to win it. And I said prior to this deadline, you have to actually make a move. You can't sit back. You can't say, hey, we're on a historic pace. Everything's great. Everything's hunky-dory. If the bats go cold, it's going to be okay. We're going to be able to overcome it. No, there were legitimate flaws. I have to tell you, I say this every time, right? I'm not hyperbolic. Sometimes I am, and when I am, fine, I will note it. I will even give you the little bit of a qualifier that I know I'm kind of losing my objectivity on something. I genuinely think that the Phillies are in trouble. I do. I'm not saying it because I'm just looking to stir up some kind of controversy. I genuinely think that they're in trouble. I think that it's pretty clear that they managed in the first 2.5 months of the season to play over their heads, to get unbelievable contributions. And I come back to starting pitching all the time. Zach Wheeler is your ace. Aaron Nola was paid significant money to really be your number 2. Ranger Suarez was pitching at a Cy Young level. Christopher Sanchez was pitching at a level that no one expected. I mean, he looked like a legitimate number 2 starter. game in and game out. And then your fifth starter, you knew was going to kind of be a mess, right, with Taijuan Walker. Like, we sort of knew that there could be an issue there. And I was Mr., team Spencer Turnbull. Everybody was great. Felt good about it. He didn't really get a chance. Walker goes out. Turnbull's getting, dicked around between being in the rotation, being in the bullpen. Gets hurt. He's effectively out of the running for the rest of the year to be in the rotation. And I said prior to the deadline, I said in the offseason, go out and get another starter. You need somebody else who's going to be able to be at the top of the rotation with Zach Wheeler, because I don't trust Aaron Nola. But at worst, go out and get somebody who could be a number 2. They went after Yamamoto. They made a significant offer to Yamamoto. They didn't get him. They had no other contingency plan in place. They didn't make a move prior to the deadline for another starter, which was a significant concern to me because, one, in the offseason when I said, please, for the love of God, go out and get somebody because you could conceivably have an issue at the top of your rotation. We know that Zach Wheeler has had injury issues in the past. We know that Ranger Suarez has had some injuries in the past. We know Aaron Nola is unbelievably inconsistent. It was like, if I had all those concerns in the offseason, and then you started to see leading up to the deadline, Wheeler, back stiffness, Suarez out a couple of times with different injuries, Christopher Sanchez starting to come down to earth a little bit, Nola, inconsistent as ever. Like, there were so many signs and so many reasons to look at the rotation alone and say, we need to add. We need to have another guy that could slot in as a 2 or a 3 at the very least. We need to go out and figure out a deal to get one of those guys just to give ourselves a little bit of leeway in case something happens, in case something goes wrong, whether it's an injury to a Wheeler or a Nola, or whether it's an injury to a Suarez, or it's a regression to the mean of Christopher Sanchez. You were at least ready. They didn't do anything. I said, was it a poverty franchise, right? It was a poverty franchise move. Yeah, a bunch of people who were, pissed off on Twitter. I can't say they're poverty. How many multi-million dollar guys do they got? They're paying $30 million a year to how many players, how many other teams compare? It doesn't matter. Sunken costs shouldn't factor into future expenditures if you're trying to be a World Series contender. I don't give a shit if you overpaid Nick Castellanos and now you regret it. Genuinely. I don't give a shit if you, for whatever reason, decided Aaron Nola was worth the contract that you decided to give him. And that he's very inconsistent. And that sometimes he looks like a Cy Young candidate and sometimes he looks like dog shit. I can't help that. But like, all of the signs were there, and you got to see them from June through the deadline that this team needed another arm in the rotation. They didn't get it. They didn't address it. And now they essentially are on this very tenuous footing because for all of the positivity that people felt around this team, including myself for a long stretch, like, yes, I saw the holes, but I said, they're good enough to overcome them. If the pitching comes up short, the lineup hits. If the lineup gets a little bit cold, the pitching has overachieved. Great. The problem is that over the last few weeks, this team has just fallen off a cliff. The bats get cold for extended periods of time. They look unbelievably inexperienced. They often look, the way that they approach their at-bats, like a team that should be on the younger end of things. A bunch of inexperienced guys. Bryce Harper, although he's had some hits in the last few games, took like a 7 or 8 game stretch of looking like an absolute shell of himself. And by the way, because I know that, Bryce Harper kind of walks on water in the minds of a lot of people. If Bryce Harper hadn't been a total 0 against the Guardians, hadn't been a total 0 against the Yankees, you're probably still talking about a team that, while they have their faults, is still in a pretty comfortable position in the NL East. The Phillies are now all of a sudden only 5.5 games up, and a lead that was at one point 9.5 or even longer, and you had the chance multiple times to put your foot on the throat of the Braves and on the Mets. You let them stick around, and we've seen it every year. Baseball repeats itself ad nauseum. Each and every year, we watch it happen. Maybe not in the NL East, where the Braves have often been, in recent years, so far ahead of everyone else. But in Major League Baseball, in a 162-game season that is far too long, we see it every year. A 5.5-game lead disappears. A 9.5-game lead, if you let a team hang around, is going to come back and become a 3.5-game lead before you can say, holy shit. It happens every year. And the Phillies had multiple chances to put the Braves out of their misery, or to extend enough of a lead that even with the notion of, all right, well, You have a couple series go wrong. All of a sudden it gets to 6.5, but then you go back to your winning ways and that becomes a 10-game lead again and you're comfortable and you kind of coast. You had the chance to effectively kill the Mets. You didn't do it. Now the Mets are 7 games out. And I don't think the Mets are like this incredible team, right? But I do think that anytime a team is within striking distance and is within distance that they say, oh, we have a series coming up, a 3-game series coming up. We pull off a sweep. We're within 4. A couple things go right. You win 2 out of 3. The team you're chasing wins 1 out of 3 or gets swept. All of a sudden, there's another game gone. You let 2 teams stick around. A team that has a killer mentality puts the Braves out. They certainly take the Mets out. This Phillies team didn't do that. They didn't have the killer mentality. They still don't have the killer mentality. They're not going to. They're not going to develop it. It's not there. You can bring back Dancing on My Own all you want. You can talk about the vibes in the locker room. You could decide to run most of the team back because the vibes are immaculate. It doesn't fucking matter because this team has shown you once again who they are. Now, they might at some point get hot again. But I'm sorry if the last couple of weeks haven't made you have significant concerns about their ability in October. I don't know what to tell you. I don't think we're living on the same plane of existence. Bryce Harper becoming an absolute no-show for multiple series in a row is a significant problem. The fact that Rob Thompson appears at any given time to have little to no idea of what to do to change the strategy of this team, especially in extra innings, is baffling to me. And the fact that Dave Dombrowski was given this, I don't know what the hell we'd even call it. He was given this almost like blessing of the fan base around the trade deadline. Oh, they went out and got Hayes. Hayes is going to he'll be a good bat. Rob Thompson said that he's not a platoon guy. He's going to be an everyday guy. Estevez, like he's going to be a lockdown closer. It's going to be great. Everybody kind of sold themselves on this. The rotation is one injury away from this season going under. Because once you lose the NL East lead, which if this shit continues, obviously they will. Once this thing goes under, that's it. You lose Zach Wheeler for a month, it's done. You lose Aaron Nola, even though he's inconsistent for a couple of weeks, you're in bad shape. Ranger Suarez ends up picking up an injury that does take him out for 6 weeks. Bad, very bad. Christopher Sanchez goes back to pitching like a number 4 or 5. Bad, very bad. Because the big thing that you should be able to rely on, the thing that you should have been able to go into the season knowing you could rely on, is that this lineup is so stacked with guys who at any given time can legitimately compete, can legitimately be mentioned in MVP conversations. They should be able to hit your way out of a pitching rut. You should be able to go into a series where you have Christopher Sanchez and Ranger Suarez and whoever the 5th starter was going to end up being, God forbid, Taijuan Walker. You should be able to go into that series and say, you know what? If these guys, as long as they keep the opposition within 4 runs, we know that some combination of Schwarber and Turner and Harper and Castellanos and Bohm are going to be able to hit their way out. And Real Muto, the best catcher in baseball. That those 6 guys, of those 6, you should be able to have 2 who are hitting pretty well at any given time and can put up enough runs to keep you in games and potentially get you to a point where later in the game, you win a 1-run match, a 1-run showdown, because that's just how the team is built. You put all this money into the lineup, and they went cold. They went dark. And the worst part is they did it mostly at the same time. Now, you could have this moment where you kind of rein it back in, and you say, but Russ, they all went cold at the same time, and they haven't lost the division lead yet. It stands to reason that throughout the month of August and September, it likely won't happen again. And you may be right. You may be. Maybe this is the one really bad stretch the Phillies are going to have. But there should be a concern here because October doesn't give you multiple series to figure it out. If your bats go cold, you die. That's it. If you're hitting no-shows, if your MVP, Bryce Harper, no-shows, you lose. If JT Realmuto doesn't become the best catcher in baseball again and rediscover his confidence, you lose. If any of the 6 guys that I mentioned really fall off a cliff, Nick Castellanos, book it, you're going to put yourself in a really bad spot. And it also doesn't help that Stott has kind of gone back and forth, but really hasn't looked that great over the last month and a half. That Marsh is really a platoon guy. That this team decided that it was worth rolling the dice with Rojas. I don't trust the bottom third of the lineup. But in fairness, you're not supposed to have to. When you have the 6 guys I named, the bottom third of the lineup shouldn't matter. Your entire future shouldn't depend on it. Anything they give you is supposed to be a bonus. I'm going to go over to the comments, because there are some things that I see here that I agree with and I definitely disagree with. But I love and appreciate all the people who comment live. So we're going to go over to them really quick. All right. Joe Papel says, even with the additions after the high point in 2008, the team regressed each of the following years through to 2012. We're watching the same with the 2022, unfortunately being the high point. Joe might be right. And that, I think, is where the concern should come in. Now, I kind of outlined it before. You're all Phillies fans, so you understand, you know the order of operations that happened around 2008, right? But like, they went out and they tried to fortify a rotation that realistically in 2008 wasn't amazing. I mean, hell, Jamie Moyer, who I absolutely loved and adored on that team, was a very old guy in terms of like professional sports, was a very old man and performed exceptionally well. Cole Hamels played really, really well. But like they decided that in 2009, we're going to go out and we're going to get Cliff Lee to add to the top of the rotation to give ourselves a chance. You get back to the World Series against the Yankees. Aside from an Alex Rodriguez home run that shouldn't have been, aside from like Pedro Martinez coming out looking like he was about to croak, like that Phillies team had a legitimate shot to beat the Yankees in 2009. So then what do? You trade him away and you bring in Halladay, which was a great move, except you shouldn't have traded away Cliff Lee. That's ultimately where Ruben Amaro really screwed up. That's where things really went sideways. You can't make that move. We all know that. So you come back, you take a look, you think it over, you take a goosey gander, you think about how all of this is supposed to work out. This Phillies team had holes. They didn't address them. They needed another guy either in the outfield or a first baseman, push Harper back to the outfield for the rest of the season for the next month and a half, because he's getting paid enough money and you should be able to tell him, go play in the outfield. We have a better target at first base. Don't ask me who that guy is. I'm not in on the negotiations. But there are players who are available from teams. You meet the right asking price, you can pretty much go out and get just about anything you need, even if it's on a short-term deal. This team needed to add another bat. They needed to add another guy who, when I look at the bottom third of the lineup and I say, anything you get is a bonus, you should have been able to take one of those spots and say, no, this guy could be mentioned in the same breath as those first 6. That's what you kind of needed to do. You didn't do that. You tried to sell everybody that Hayes is going to be an everyday player. We'll see if that one pans out. I'm not sold, but maybe it will. Maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe September will roll around. He will establish himself as an everyday guy. You get into October, all of a sudden he becomes the most clutch hitter for the team. And we all look back on it and say, Hayes was a sensational addition. True brilliance. I don't see it. Estevez, I think, is going to be a really valuable addition. That is the one place that I give the Phillies front office credit. You went out and got a guy who has been a closer before, although, as I mentioned last week, not for a team that has actually had to compete for a playoff spot. Certainly not for one that has had to play in any real meaningful games in recent years, because the Angels stink. But that was a good addition. You didn't address the rotation. And I'm telling you right now, we all know I can be insufferable when I'm right about something, right? We fast forward a few weeks. Any injuries, any regression to mean, this is going to be a scenario where, like, it is entirely conceivable that a week from now, that lead, that 5.5 game lead the Phillies have over the Braves, is cut down to 2.5. And it's entirely possible that the Mets get to within 5. Then all of a sudden, good luck. Because then you're going to have two teams that are incredibly hungry, that see the blood in the water. Now, this Phillies team does have the ability. They could go out, they could sweep a series, they could go out, they could win the next 2 or 3 from the Dodgers. Maybe all of a sudden it kind of flips things back on its head. The Phillies rediscover their mojo, and a week from now I look like an idiot. A month from now I look like a total fraud. It's entirely possible. But this went from being, it's an anomaly. The Phillies' struggles, the Bats' struggles have been an anomaly, to, no, this is a significant sample size. The last few weeks have been a significant sample size. And it's enough that it should have struck some fear into the Phillies front office to go out and fix a few of the holes. And they didn't do it. They fixed one. I'll give them Estevez. They did that one thing. Ford says, hot, cold bats, and the pitching has revealed itself. I made the comparison, and this might not land for everybody, but the comparison that I went with the rotation at the start of the year is almost identical to what happened with the Flyers at the start of last season. The Flyers are supposed to be a really bad team, so that's not where the parallel exists, so follow me. The Flyers were supposed to be a really bad team. Carter Hart and Sam Ersson played incredibly well in goal. They kept the Flyers in games that they had no business being in. In fact, there were games that they effectively won the game themselves for the Flyers. And we got up until about January, and right up until Carter Hart, had to turn himself into London, Ontario police. You got about that far into the season saying these netminders together have done an incredible job and are both playing at top-tier goalie level. I make the comparison to the Phillies because while the Phillies' expectations were obviously significantly higher, the Phillies' rotation for a large stretch, if you remember, it wasn't on this show, it was on Crossing Broadcast and on others, we talked about the fact that, they had 3 or 4 guys that were in the top, 6 ERA in the National League. You had 3 guys that were actively being considered as potential Cy Young candidates between Wheeler, Nola, and Suarez. That's not normal. And this wasn't a situation where the Phillies went out and made a trade for a Cliff Lee and a Roy Halladay, or they traded for a Roy Halladay, they re-signed Cliff Lee, they traded for Roy Oswalt, and now you're 4 of the guys on the staff are or have been ace pitchers at some point. You were just getting over performances by a significant margin. And unfortunately, if we use the Flyers analogy, the bottom fell out. Now, I don't expect Zach Wheeler or Aaron Nola to have to turn themselves into a police department and essentially be blacklisted from Major League Baseball, right? I don't expect that, but an injury can do that. An injury effectively takes them off the table. Zach Wheeler having back stiffness before is not a great thing. It could potentially rear its head again. Same thing with Suarez. It's there. You got over-performances, which is great, except when it's not. The over-performances are great, assuming that you also go into it acknowledging there are over-performances we still need to add. The Phillies didn't add. All right, I'm going to go over here to BJ Beretta. Why do Philly teams start hot and collapse? Eagles 10-0. Phillies by record in baseball, or best record in baseball, I think that was supposed to be. Flyers in the 3rd playoff spot much of the season before missing the wild card. Can't take it anymore. The thing that, and we have to be fair here, right? The thing about those other teams, the Eagles, right? They started out 10-0. They looked great. For the first 6 or 7 games, I kept saying, man, imagine what happens when it all starts to click and everything starts to kind of fall into place. Because you would see, even in those first 10 games, if we take that whole sample size, we would see things that were concerning, but it was wow, they're still winning. Imagine if they clean up those issues, how good they're going to be. The problem was, and the thing that we didn't really recognize at that point was, oh no, them getting to 10-0 was everything going right. It was everything going about as well as it could, with there still being significant problems. And from that point on, when the floor fell out, the bottom fell out, and they went on that epic collapse, we got a better feel for what that team probably should have been. That Flyers team that was supposed to be dog shit, we knew the coach was going to raise their floor. We didn't know that the goalies were going to overperform the way they did. And then at some point, the Flyers fell in love with the idea of making the playoffs, and they traded away Sean Walker. They got a first-round pick. That was fantastic. But they didn't make a lot of the other moves that people expected them to make that were supposed to be some of those tough decisions to try to restock the asset cabinet. They didn't do it. They fell in love with the idea of making the playoffs. So I don't know, like BJ, I feel bad. I do, because I think we're all in this together. I think if you are a fan of more than just one Philly team, you understand and are used to experiencing this kind of thing. But he is right. And the thing that's even more confounding here, at least on the Phillies front, is they typically have been a slower starting team. And then they get hot around June, and they ride that into the playoffs. We got the pretty hot start to start, and it kept going. And then it started to fall out. And then post All-Star break, it has really fallen out. And now the hope has to be that they're going to be able to get on another run. They have enough time. It is entirely possible. But I have concerns. CT Landry. Now, I like the fact that CT over on X remembered that you click on the video and you post your comment in there. CT says true about the collapse, about how it's bad. But I'd rather this happen in August, not at the end of September. Here's the problem, CT. I love and I understand the line of thinking. And in fairness, to me, it's a similar line of thinking as like the Eagles are fighting for home field advantage. And in week 16, they lose a game to the Giants or something, right? And you go, well, I would have liked for the Eagles to have won out and gotten the last couple of wins of the year. But if you got to lose the game, lose it in week 16. Better to lose it at the end of the regular season than lose in the playoffs, which is fine, except sometimes we know how that pans out. Sometimes that loss late in the season puts the game plan out there for the opposition in the playoffs, especially for the opposing defensive coordinator to figure out, oh, there's the hole. We had most of the ideas. We had concepts. We saw another team put it into effect. They figured out how to shut down Jalen Hurts with limited mobility. Okay, we got it. So I get it. And I get the idea that like better now than later and when the games matter more. But to me, it's still not ideal. All right, let me see. Joe Papel says hunger. Is that what's missing here? There's your maybe one good thing that you can come back to. Maybe the one thing that gives you a little bit of hope in this absolute collapse, this epic shit show that the Phillies have put on display. Maybe the one thing that you can kind of hang your hat on is that the Phillies have been so far ahead for so long this season that maybe they just got complacent. Like, what's the adage? It's fat pigs get fed, something hogs get slaughtered. Greedy hogs get slaughtered. Somebody drop it in the comments. I know there's a thing for it, right? But like they were in a position where they were getting their cake and eating it too. They were in a position where they were winning. They were able to be inconsistent, but to still win games and have a historic start. The vibes were great in the locker room. Everybody was happy. But if you get complacent, you get slaughtered. If you get complacent, teams start to come in and they bring their best. You're no longer the Phillies who are, potentially one of the better teams in the NL East. All of a sudden, you're the Philadelphia Phillies, the best team in baseball, the best record in baseball. Teams are going to get up to face you. The Yankees, who had been inconsistent for significant chunks of the season, came into that series and they decided they were going to tee off on the Phillies. They decided they were going to treat it like their own World Series because they know that if things go well for them, they ultimately could end up in the World Series against the Phillies. So they wanted to see how they stacked up. The Dodgers are going to do the same exact thing. The Dodgers are looking at it saying, hey, everybody has known since probably 2 weeks into the season, Dodgers, Phillies, probably on a collision course for the NLCS. The Dodgers are going to bring it each and every game. They know what is on the line. I want to take a look ahead really quick, and I'm going to get back to the comments. But after the Dodgers series, you have the Diamondbacks, you have the Marlins, who always give the Phillies a hard time. You have the Nationals for a 4-game set. The Nationals are another team where it's a divisional series. Anything can happen. Then you have the Braves. If you don't figure out a way, I mean, ideally, the Phillies win the next 2 against the Dodgers, right? They pull the nose up on this. They get themselves back in position to do something right for a change. If the Phillies can win the next 2 against the Dodgers, they maintain or maybe even grow their lead in the NL East a little bit. Maybe they feel a little bit better. You go into that series against the Diamondbacks, you probably look to get a split. But the Diamondbacks right now are 9 games over 500, so it's not like it's a guarantee to even get a split on the road, but maybe. All right, so you try to get a split there. The Marlins series at home, you would hope you win both of those games, right? And you maybe extend that lead a little bit more, maybe. But if we're all being honest, it probably ends up being 2 really ugly games. It's entirely possible the Phillies lose both of them. Then you get that National series, a 4-game set at home. Ultimately, it's a 6-game homestand. 2 Marlins, 4 Nationals. That needs to be a 4-2, 5-1 series. That can't be a split. If that ends up being a split after you finish the series against the Dodgers and that 4-game set in Arizona, if that series, if that homestand, that 6-game homestand, if you go 500 or worse, my guess is that the Braves will have already passed you or will be a game behind. And then, oh, by the way, you go on the road next to take on the Braves in a 3-game set at their place. This is why I kind of get angry. This is why I get as emotive as I do. This is why I get so emotional about it. The Phillies have done themselves no favors. You simply cannot lose the next 2 against the Dodgers. You really cannot go into Arizona and walk away with like a 1-3 record. You can't walk into that 6-game home set against NL East teams and underperform. You can't do it. Or the Braves will be at your doorstep or they will already be past you. And by the way, if the Braves get to a point where they pass you in the standings before that series, you can pretty much like put a bow on it that they're going to win the NL East. Because they will have done what the Phillies did years ago, right? To the Mets, where it looked like the Mets were going to be unbeatable and the Mets collapsed and it was LOL Mets and the Phillies went on and went past them and that was it. Same thing can happen here. Like these next 2 games against the Dodgers are critical. I'm not a big must-win guy, but kind of must-win. Andrew Fawcett asks, where is this team's Joe Blanton? I don't know. Is Christopher Sanchez your Joe Blanton? Maybe. Maybe he is. Joe Blanton was a pretty good pitcher out in Oakland, though, before he came here. Sanchez was just kind of like this total unknown. Let's see. Ford says he knew that this was all fool's gold. Andrew Fawcett with the real concern here. Did the home run derby affect Bohm's swing? Remember we talked about that prior to the home run derby? About how it screwed up Bobby Abreu? And how that had to just be a one-time thing. I don't know. Maybe. Let's see. Andrew Fawcett asks, is Nick Castellanos a boat anchor? I don't know. I think he'd be more useful as a boat anchor. Like, here's the thing. Even if Nick Castellanos has a stretch where he gets hot, like, if he has a stretch where he looks like a competent hitter for like 3 or 4 games, maybe even 6 games, you can start to feel good about it, but you know the bottom's going to fall back out. You just know it. Like, the sample size, as a Philly at least, is big enough that you can say, we can't ever expect anything from Nick Castellanos. We can't expect him to ever be consistent. I will hope, right? Phillies make the playoffs. They get to the NLCS. Things are kind of on the ropes. Nick Castellanos gets hot, gets you to the World Series, has some big hits. You win the World Series. Everything will be forgiven. All of the inconsistencies will be forgiven. All of the underwhelming performances, the times where you genuinely sit back and say, like, is this guy, like, how did they think he was a legit hitter? You look at his stats when he played for Cincinnati and then here, and you go like, I don't know. How did he fall off the way that he has? All that goes away. If he has a good postseason run and you ultimately win the World Series, all is forgiven. Ford says if Castellanos didn't play ball, he'd be a lube tech at Meineke. Guy has 2 brain cells. As somebody whose dad is a mechanic, or was a mechanic, I take offense to that. I do. Mechanics are smart people. You should be ashamed of yourself, Ford. I'm not going to be really rude to you because it's your birthday. I think I already told you to fuck off once, so I'm not going to do that. But Ford, we respect mechanics in this show. All right? We do. Let's see. Andrew says he's smart enough to pour oil but not change a filter. Maybe install wiper blades. All right. Well, hey, at least we're moving in the right direction. Nick Castellanos will have a few things going. Maybe he'll work at Mavis. I don't know. Let's see. Oh, this is the thing, though. Andrew Fawcett says, but his relationship with his son is inspirational. I think it's great that his son is at these games. I think it's great that there's a positive relationship between a father and son. I would say nothing negative against it, right? But like, whenever Castellanos just sucks and then has a good game when his son is in attendance, and Phillies Twitter has this thing, oh my God, he's there again. This is great. It's like, that's swell, but like, a lot of these guys have kids. Sometimes they go to games. Sometimes they don't. I genuinely don't care if his kid is in attendance or not. I just want the guy to hit, all right? I just want the guy to do what he was brought into town to do. I don't need the inspirational story. I don't need, like, the photo op after the game. I don't need the extra crowd shots. I don't. I just need the guy to go out and hit. Sean C. says, nothing good happens out west in late summer with this team. Arizona feels like a disaster on the horizon. I think he's totally right. I think Sean is 100% right. CT Landry asks or says, I wonder if Joe Blanton can still pitch. I wouldn't be opposed. Sean C., maybe I'm the ultimate pessimist, but Christopher Sanchez is going to hit a wall or regress at the worst time. Ranger Suarez is rapidly approaching a career high in innings pitched. This is the thing, guys. Like, this is where it's frustrating that, like, you have Dave Dombrowski here, who has gone through this, has been a winning executive. I don't know why there wasn't more of an onus put on fortifying the top of the rotation, or at least the middle of it. Like, you need to have a deep team that can handle adversity when you get to the postseason. To me, it's almost like they were smelling themselves. From the players to maybe the coaches to the front office, it was almost this like, we're infallible kind of thing. Or that this actual stretch of concern, they were just going to write it off as being an anomaly and that it wasn't ultimately going to matter. I think it's bullshit. I think that they messed up. And I think ultimately if an injury happens, if a regression happens, we're going to come back to this. And I will once again say, unfortunately, I was right about this. Again, I could be wrong. Let's see. Okay. I'm going to go to the other topic now. There was one other topic, and here's one from CT. Anything in AAA or AA that can help? I don't think so. I don't think there's anything down there right now that you would either feel good enough about them being significant enough of an upgrade to bring them up, and there's also the possibility that you could run into the issue that this is a powder keg, potentially, right? You don't want to bring a young guy into this stretch where you are in a spot in the NL East where the Braves are only 5.5 back, and you're the Phillies looking at this upcoming schedule, and you say, like, if things go poorly, this could go sideways really fast. I don't think you want to bring a kid up in that situation, in that scenario, with that kind of added pressure. You could mess with their head. If they get shelled, all of a sudden it's a significant problem. It's a shame that you don't have an Andrew Painter healthy and available in the minors because, yeah, he would be the one that I'd say, okay, like he's gotten some reps before. He's a guy that you do think down the line is going to be an ace quality pitcher. He's a guy that has ultimately been deemed untouchable. It would be great to have him available. Since he's not, no, I don't think they have anybody who's raring to go. And I also don't think they have anybody who's in the minors right now that you'd say is like a good reclamation project. I'll say this. I'm going to piss off a good number of people, right? But, like, I've asked this question a bunch, and maybe not on this show, but, like, I've asked this, and I know that it's like a touchy subject. Totally get it. Totally acknowledge it. There are a lot of weird things that happen in sports. There are a lot of questionable human beings who make their way to the pinnacle of a sport. If you're the Phillies and you do sustain an injury, if a Zach Wheeler goes out, if a Ranger Suarez goes out, if there is a regression from Christopher Sanchez, if you can't trust Aaron Nola, and you don't have anybody readily available in the minors, there is one and only option that I could see, or that I'd say you at least have to kick the tires on, and it's Trevor Bauer. I know that there is a lot of baggage. I get it. And I don't want to talk about all of the accusations on this show because it'll end up getting flagged by YouTube for disturbing content or sensitive content. But like, totally get it. This team didn't fully cut bait with Odubel Herrera when he allegedly beat up his girlfriend, right? This team didn't sever ties with Brett Myers when there were significant concerns. When he just like somehow fell out of his pickup truck and hit his face or something. It just, it's totally normal. That happens all the time. I'm not saying the Phillies are the kind of team that it would go out and get a guy like that. I'm not saying that they're a team that would, go out and try to push the envelope. But like when it comes to somebody who is an actual good pitcher, who has legitimate stuff, who could really solidify the middle part of your rotation, Trevor Bauer is that guy. I don't think the Phillies are going to want to touch him. I don't think they will. I don't think they're going to touch that situation with a 20-foot pole. But like to me, that's out there. Like you do, in theory, have that break glass in case of emergency guy available. I think he's effectively been blacklisted for Major League Baseball. I don't expect him to ever pitch in Major League Baseball again. He's been playing, he played in Japan, I think, and I think he was playing in Mexico. I don't see a scenario where he ends up here. But like, let's just play with his numbers here for a second. He's 10-0 in Mexico with a 2.48 ERA. Make of that what you will. But I come back and I say, I think it's worth it. I think it's at least worth a discussion. I'll go over really quick to some of the fine folks over in the comments, and then we're going to get the last thing, and then we're going to head out. Sean C. says, we talked about the Union running it back. The Phillies have essentially run it back twice since 2022. Subtract Segura, add Turner, subtract Hoskins. It's the same problems popping up for the third season, albeit 2 months earlier. Mr. Twitster checks in. First time catching it live. Good morning, Russ. Good morning, Mr. Twitster. Thank you for finding the show. Greatly appreciate it. Sean does not want Bauer. The only Bauer allowed is Jack. Where is he? This is bigger than you and me. I miss 24. I miss good 24. Those were the days. Andrew Fawcett and Ford are both saying the same thing about Bauer, that he was found innocent, that it was fabricated. Pros have been given second chances for worse, like Michael Vick. Again, I don't want to get into all the accusations and into the he said, she said, and what was found and what was actually cleared and all that. There is still a reason that teams haven't gone back to Bauer. Again, given his stuff, given what he can do on the mound, there would and should be teams interested in him. There clearly is something else out there that teams are afraid of. And honestly, it might just be the PR hit. It legitimately could be. Here's the thing. In a city like Philly that gave Michael Vick a second chance, if the Phillies really needed rotation help going into the playoffs and they signed Trevor Bauer and they really took it on the chin for the PR disaster that it could be, and he goes out and he helps you win a World Series, guess what? Most of those Phillies fans who derided the team and the front office for going out and signing him, they're gonna celebrate the fact that they won the World Series all the same. I could be wrong. But we'll see. HC over here says, can we just start hockey season? I don't know if you want to start hockey season yet. I really don't. This is actually maybe the more interesting part. CT Landry says the Phillies clubhouse couldn't handle Bauer. A lot can't. Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna continue to be the team that talks about vibes, yeah, maybe this locker room wouldn't exactly do well with him. That's totally possible. I'm looking, and I have the other thing that I want to get to, and we'll probably expand on this a little bit more on Friday's show. But CJGJ kind of went off over the weekend, and not in a bad way. I don't want to frame went off as a negative, right? But CJGJ had a moment with the media over the weekend talking about training camp and about treatment by the media, his first stretch when he was in Detroit, now that he's back. And I want to go to it because there's something bigger that CJGJ brings to the table for the Eagles, and there's something that this team really lacked last year that he's bringing back to this squad. So I want to go over to this really quick, and then we'll pick up with this more later this week. But let's go over to CJGJ and what he had to say to the assembled media on Sunday. Here it is.
No filter. I don't care how y'all feel. I don't care how you feel. I don't care how you feel. I don't care how you feel. I'm here to win, hold my teammates accountable, hold myself accountable. Like, I get dawned on for saying little things, and I mean, if y'all wasn't hating at me, I ain't doing my job. So I'm glad that I got a lot of hate and a lot of critics. If that makes sense. I've been okay with when I told y'all was obnoxious. Truthfully, I've been okay with when y'all told me I couldn't be a good safety. I was okay with when y'all told me I couldn't go to Detroit and take them back to where they was. They never been somewhere. I played 2 games. I played 1 game with a broken arm. So you put me in the box and you tell me how I last against other safeties and other people in this league, and I'll let you describe it. I don't need no fuel to fire about people saying they missing me, because it's all smoke and mirrors. I miss football. I miss playing with the right people. I miss hanging with the right guys. So I feel like I miss the team more than the team miss me, because I feel like the camaraderie is back, if that makes sense. But put winner behind my name, and competitor and a passionate player before you say anything else. Love y'all.
I think that was totally fair. I genuinely do. If you go back to when he was here the first time, there were a lot of concerns, a lot of media people, a lot of Eagles reporters kind of cited some of the potential concerns when he was brought in, that his previous team didn't go out of their way to go above and beyond with a contract. They let him play without one. They weren't really worried about him signing elsewhere. The Eagles ended up bringing him in. He was a significant contributor on the team that went to the Super Bowl. And then at the end of the year, it became the team had to pick who they were going to try to bring back. They ultimately chose to bring back Darius Slay. They made a few other moves, and CJGJ was kind of the guy who was effectively forced out. And at the time, I was concerned because it was like he was a legitimate safety. He was a legitimate member of that secondary that I didn't think they had anyone to replace with. And he went off to Detroit, and like he said, he didn't play a lot, right? But he brought the mentality to Detroit. He helped get that defense mentally in the space to be a potential NFC representative in a Super Bowl. And now that he's back, I think it's interesting that he noted he thinks he needed the team more than the team needed him, or he missed the team more than they missed him. I think there's like a bit of humility in that. Again, for a guy that there had been character concerns, right, previous to this, and that when he left, when he went to Detroit, there were a few things that came out from here about, I don't know, like character, the people that he surrounded himself with, yada, yada, your sister's ass, all that. Him being back is perfect for this team. It brings back a swagger, and like he said, it brings back somebody who brings accountability to his teammates. And if you're an Eagles fan who went through that absolute collapse at the end of last season, where we sat back and said, how the hell does a defensive unit fall apart the way that it did? So much so that your head coach decided, we're going to, as a legitimate Super Bowl contender, we're going to fire. They didn't, right? They demoted Sean Desai, but they effectively fired him and replaced him with Matt Patricia during the regular season. How does a team fall apart that way? I think they lacked accountability. It was one of the things that you heard after last season, is that there was a real accountability issue. All right, fine. You've now gone out, and this is on both sides of the ball, you've gone out and replaced your coordinators. Defensively, you've replaced Sean Desai / Matt Patricia with one of the more respected, long-term, has a good coaching tree candidates in Vic Fangio. And now you've brought back a guy who was legitimately a leader on that defense that went to the Super Bowl, that you almost won. I think it's great that he's back. And I think that it's great that he's candid. And the fact that he kind of gave it back to a few of the people in the media, because Listen, players will say they don't read whatever, they don't listen to whatever, but they do. They're aware of it. Even if they don't sit down and read it, somebody tells them, this guy wrote this about you, this lady wrote this about you, this person said this about you. And like, I think as an athlete, you're totally within your right to call bullshit when you see it. And so if CJGJ is going to do that, if that's going to be his edge, if that's going to be what gives him the edge, more power to him. I actually feel significantly better about the defense, not having seen anything, not having gone to a practice, not having talked to anybody around the team. I feel better about this Eagles defense now that CJGJ is back. You combine that with Vic Fangio taking over the defense, and I don't see this version of the Eagles falling apart the way that last year's did. I don't see defensive collapses happening with this defensive unit like I did last year. I'm glad he's back. All right. I think that's it for now. I don't see anything else in the comments that I wanted to get to. We will talk on Friday. Friday's show should be back to the regular 8 a.m. start. Today was a little bit wonky with the kids. Should be an 8 a.m. start on Friday. Please join me live on YouTube at The Russ Joy Show. You can find that over on YouTube. You can find the show also on the Joy Media Facebook, on my Twitter at JoyOnBroad. You can find it if you want on the Joy Media YouTube account. But again, when you're in the live comments, go to the Joy Media Show or the Russ Joy Show YouTube page. That's really the better place to go. That's where more people hang out, drop comments. I want to thank everybody for joining me live. If you're a podcast listener, I love and appreciate you more than you can imagine. Thank you so much for subscribing on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and wherever you get your podcasts. So we will be back on Friday. Until then, everybody keep your head up. Maybe the Phillies will pull off a couple of wins here. Maybe they'll get themselves in better position for that Diamondbacks series. Maybe they won't, but I'll be here to break it all down on the Russ Joy Show this Friday. Thanks again. I will talk to all of you Friday morning.